The silence inside the sprawling mansion in McLean, Virginia, was heavy, punctuated only by the low hum of an air conditioner that seemed to mock the stillness within. On September 8, 2018, this quiet was shattered when a 911 call led police to a scene of calculated horror. Two women, a mother and her youngest daughter, lay dead in what appeared to be a tragic murder-suicide. But as the dust settled, a darker reality emerged, one of borrowed voices and a daughter's cold-blooded betrayal. Your likes and comments help promote our videos, and please subscribe to Crime Queen if you appreciate high-quality true crime videos. Thank you. McLean, Virginia, is the kind of place where silence is expensive. Nestled in Fairfax County, just a stone's throw from the pulsating heart of Washington, D.C., it is a sanctuary for the elite, high-ranking government officials, intelligence officers, and corporate titans. Here, the lawns are manicured with surgical precision, and the houses are more than just homes. They are architectural declarations of status. In the neighborhood of Keats Court, the air usually carries nothing but the distant hum of high-end sedans and the rustle of ancient oaks. This was the world of Pamela Hargan, a woman who had spent decades building a life that mirrored the polished perfection of her surroundings. Pamela, 63, was the quintessential Northern Virginia success story. As a high-level executive at a global defense contracting firm, she was a woman defined by her competence, her sharp intellect, and an unwavering devotion to her family. Friends described her as the gold standard of matriarchs, generous, protective, and deeply involved in the lives of her three daughters. She was a woman who didn't just provide. She curated a future for her children, ensuring they had every tool necessary to thrive in a competitive world. By 2018, she was on the verge of a new chapter, preparing to move into a custom-built home that was meant to be a crowning achievement for her family's legacy. Then there was Helen. At 23, Helen Hargan was the baby of the family, a recent graduate from Southern Methodist University with a degree in finance. She was bright, vivacious, and possessed a gentle spirit that often acted as the glue for the family's shifting dynamics. Helen was at that enviable, terrifying threshold of adulthood where everything feels possible. She had a boyfriend she adored in Dallas, and she was making plans to move back to Texas to start her own life. To Pamela, Helen was a source of immense pride, a young woman who had internalized the family's values of hard work and integrity. But the Hargan family tree had complex branches, and at 35, Megan was the oldest. Unlike Helen, who seemed to be gliding toward success, Megan's life was a series of friction points. Megan was a mother herself, raising a young daughter, and for several years, she had been living under her mother's roof. In the affluent circles of McLean, this arrangement wasn't entirely uncommon, but it created a simmering undercurrent of dependency. To the outside world, Megan was the devoted eldest daughter helping her mother with the transition to the new house. Behind closed doors, however, the gold standard was starting to tarnish. The relationship between a mother like Pamela and a daughter like Megan is often a delicate balance of support and control. Pamela was generous to a fault, but her generosity came with expectations. She wanted her daughters to be self-sufficient, to be leaders. Megan, however, was struggling to keep her head above water. While the family enjoyed the fruits of Pamela's labor, Megan was secretly drowning in a sea of debt that she couldn't let anyone see. She was a woman living in a mansion with a bank account that was functionally empty, a disparity that would eventually warp her sense of reality. In this environment, status isn't just about what you have, it's about the perception of what you have. Megan had grown up in the shadow of her mother's monumental success, and the pressure to maintain that facade was suffocating. She saw the ease with which her mother navigated the world of high finance and the promising trajectory of her younger sister, Helen. While Helen was being gifted a new home by Pamela, a gesture of love and a head start on her future, Megan felt herself sliding further into the background. The house on Keats Court was meant to be a fortress of family unity, but by late summer of 2018, it had become a pressure cooker. Pamela was becoming increasingly concerned about Megan's financial habits and her lack of direction. She was a woman who dealt in facts and figures, and the figures in Megan's life weren't adding up. Pamela began to tighten the reins, questioning Megan's spending and urging her to find a path toward independence. She didn't realize that by trying to save her daughter from a financial collapse, she was inadvertently pushing a desperate woman toward a different kind of solution. The tragedy of the Hargan family isn't just found in the violence that would follow, but in the quiet disintegration of trust. In the weeks leading up to September, the atmosphere in the McLean home was thick with unspoken tension. Helen was excited about her move, Pamela was focused on the logistics of the new house, and Megan was watching. She was observing the wire transfers, the passwords, and the immense wealth that sat just out of her reach. She was the mistress of a house that wasn't hers, a woman surrounded by voices that she was preparing to steal. The biography of the Hargans is a tale of two worlds, the public one, filled with achievement and gold standard parenting, and the private one, where resentment was being fed by a growing, frantic greed. It was a world where a mother's love was seen as a resource to be exploited rather than a gift to be cherished. As the Virginia summer began to fade into autumn, the stage was set for a betrayal that would leave the elite community of McLean questioning if they ever truly knew their neighbors at all. In the hallowed, quiet hallways of the McLean mansion, the air was thick with a brand of tension that only families truly understand. A complex tapestry of unspoken expectations, simmering jealousies, and the heavy weight of a legacy that felt more like a burden than a gift. To the neighbors peering through the wrought iron gates, the Hargans were the picture of suburban stability. But inside, the relationship between Pamela, Megan, and Helen was a volatile triangle where love and financial control were inextricably linked. Pamela Hargan was a woman who believed that success was the only acceptable currency, and she spent her life ensuring her daughters were minted in that same image. While she was the gold standard of providers, her generosity was a double-edged sword. It offered a life of luxury, but it demanded a level of transparency that Megan simply could not afford. Megan, as the eldest, had always been the outlier in this ecosystem of high achievement. While Pamela navigated the high-stakes world of corporate defense and Helen excelled in the disciplined world of finance, Megan seemed to be perpetually treading water. By 2018, at 35, she was living back in her mother's house with her young daughter, a situation that fostered a toxic mix of gratitude and deep-seated resentment. She was a woman caught between two identities, the responsible mother trying to find her footing, and the dependent daughter who felt infantilized by her mother's oversight. The friction was constant. Pamela was increasingly frustrated by Megan's inability to manage her life, and Megan was increasingly desperate to hide the fact that she was already failing. The catalyst for the final, fatal breakdown in their relationship was, quite literally, a matter of foundations. Pamela had decided to purchase a brand-new, $500,000 home for her youngest daughter, Helen. It was a gesture of immense love, a way to anchor the baby of the family as she started her life in Texas. For Helen, it was a dream. For Megan, it was an insult. In Megan's distorted reality, every dollar spent on Helen's future was a dollar stolen from her own perceived inheritance. She watched the wire transfers and the paperwork with the eyes of a predator, calculating how much was being taken from her. The house for Helen became a physical monument to Megan's own perceived inadequacy, a constant reminder that she was the daughter who needed help, while Helen was the daughter who earned rewards. Behind the scenes, Megan's financial life was a sprawling disaster of her own making. She had developed a pattern of theft, siphoning money from her mother's accounts to support a lifestyle she couldn't earn. She was a ghost in the machine of Pamela's finances, manipulating passwords and forging signatures to keep her own creditors at bay. But Pamela was beginning to notice the discrepancies. The woman who built a career on precision was starting to ask questions about missing funds and unauthorized transfers. Megan knew the clock was ticking. If Pamela discovered the full extent of the betrayal, the gold standard life would vanish, replaced by the cold reality of criminal charges and familial exile. This desperation gave birth to the concept of the borrowed voices. Megan realized that in the digital age, presence is often nothing more than a text message. If she could control the phones, she could control the narrative. She began to act as a shadow messenger between her mother and sister, often twisting their words or inventing conversations to keep them separated and confused. She would tell Pamela that Helen was being ungrateful, and then tell Helen that Pamela was being overbearing. By poisoning the well of their communication, Megan ensured that she remained the central, trusted figure in the house. She wasn't just living in the mansion, she was managing a play where she was the only one who knew the script. The relationship between the sisters was equally strained by this manipulation. Helen, bright and unsuspecting, adored her older sister. She looked to Megan for guidance and support during the stressful process of moving. Megan, in turn, used this trust as a weapon. She would listen to Helen's hopes and fears only to use them as leverage later, painting Helen as unstable to their mother, to justify the need for Megan to handle the family's affairs. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. Megan created an environment where Pamela felt she couldn't trust Helen, and Helen felt she couldn't talk to Pamela without Megan as a buffer. As the summer of 2018 reached its peak, the atmosphere in the McLean home was suffocating. The move-in date for Helen's new house was approaching, which meant a massive final wire transfer of over $400,000 was imminent. Megan saw this as her last opportunity to secure her own future. She began to obsessively monitor her mother's bank accounts, waiting for the perfect moment to intercept the funds. The bond of sisterhood and the sacred tie of motherhood had been completely replaced by the cold, hard logic of a bank ledger. To Megan, her mother and sister were no longer people. They were obstacles standing between her and a $400,000 reset button for her life. The final days were marked by a chilling level of normalcy. They ate together, discussed the new house, and played with Megan's daughter, all while Megan was finalizing the logistics of a murder. She had spent months borrowing their voices through text messages, learning their speech patterns and their habits so she could mimic them when they were gone. She was preparing for a world where she would be the only voice left in the house. The gold standard family was already dead in spirit long before the first shot was fired. It had been killed by a daughter who believed that a mortgage-free life was worth more than the lives of the people who loved her most. The relationship dynamic was a classic tragedy of the enabler and the exploiter. Pamela, in her desire to help her struggling daughter, had inadvertently given Megan the keys to the kingdom, literally and figuratively. She shared passwords, account details, and house keys, never imagining that the daughter she was trying to save was actually the architect of her destruction. Megan didn't see it as murder. In her warped mind, she was simply taking back what she felt she was owed, using the voices of her victims to smooth over the ripples she was about to create in their elite, quiet world. The morning of September 8, 2018, broke over the Virginia landscape with a deceptive serenity, the kind of stillness that precedes a seismic shift. Inside the quiet mansion on Keats Court, the air didn't ripple with the sound of breakfast or the mundane chatter of a family starting their day. Instead, it was thick with the suffocating weight of a lethal, long-brewed plan. While the rest of McLean was waking up to a typical Saturday, Megan Hargan was preparing to step into a role she had rehearsed in the digital shadows for months, the architect of her family's final silence. She had spent weeks borrowing the voices of her mother and sister, weaving a web of fraudulent text messages and falsified wire transfers that had already primed the financial system for a massive extraction. But the digital theft was no longer enough. The physical obstacles, the woman who provided everything, and the sister who was about to inherit the future Megan craved, had to be removed. The incident wasn't a sudden explosion of rage, but a cold, rhythmic execution. As shots rang out in the sprawling house, Megan didn't just take their lives, she took their identities. Before the blood was even cold, she was back on their phones, sending messages to boyfriends and relatives, carefully maintaining the illusion that Pamela and Helen were still breathing, still arguing, still alive. It was a masterclass in psychological horror. A daughter sitting in the aftermath of a double murder, casually texting as if she were her own victims, ensuring that the world outside would stay away just long enough for her to finish her dark work. The pristine silence of the McLean mansion held its breath for nearly 24 hours, a tomb of marble and glass harboring a secret so grotesque it felt as though the very walls might sweat. By the afternoon of September 9, 2018, the digital charade Megan Hargan had meticulously maintained began to fray at the edges. While she had spent the previous day borrowing the voices of the dead, sending frantic, staged text messages from her mother's and sister's phones to create a narrative of a family in crisis, the lack of actual vocal contact was starting to alarm those on the outside. It was Helen's boyfriend, thousands of miles away in Texas, who finally broke the spell. He had spent the night receiving chilling, erratic texts from Helen's phone, messages that spoke of a violent confrontation between her and their mother, messages that sounded like a suicide note written in thumb-tapped code. When the voices finally went silent and the calls went unanswered, he did the only thing he could. He called the authorities to peer into the void Megan had created. When the first patrol cars glided quietly into Keats Court, the officers expected a domestic dispute or a mental health crisis. They were unprepared for the stage-managed horror awaiting them behind the heavy front doors. Inside, the air was stagnant, smelling of metallic copper and the lingering ozone of gunpowder. The scene was a masterclass in deception. In the wood-paneled office, they found Pamela Hargan, the family's gold standard matriarch, slumped in her chair, a single devastating gunshot wound to her head. A few rooms away, in the laundry area, lay the body of 23-year-old Helen. Nearby, a .22 caliber rifle sat in a position that, at a cursory glance, suggested the unthinkable, that the youngest daughter had executed her mother before turning the weapon on herself. The initial search was not just for evidence, but for an explanation. The community of McLean, a fortress of high-level intelligence and corporate power, reeled as the news broke. Rumors rippled through the manicured streets, tales of a murder-suicide that seemed to fit the frantic text messages Megan had borrowed and sent out into the world. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones about the pressures of such an elite life. Wonder if the bright, finance-minded Helen had finally snapped under the weight of her mother's expectations. Megan, the surviving daughter, played the role of the grieving, traumatized witness with chilling precision. She sat on the curb as investigators swarmed the house, her young daughter shielded from the flashing lights, portraying the victim of a tragedy she had, in reality, authored. But as detectives began their systematic sweep of the mansion, the voices Megan had borrowed began to talk back in ways she hadn't anticipated. They looked at the angle of the rifle found near Helen, a weapon that seemed physically impossible for a woman of her stature to have used on herself in the manner she was found. They looked at the blood spatter, which told a story of a shooter standing several feet away, not a desperate girl at the end of her rope. Most importantly, they looked at the house's digital heartbeat. The security system, the Wi-Fi logs, and the very phones Megan had used to mimic her victims were about to reveal that the murderer in the murder-suicide narrative was still very much alive, and she was standing right in front of them, wearing the mask of a survivor. The search for the truth moved from the blood-stained carpets to the cold, logical world of data. While the town mourned what they thought was a tragic family collapse, the forensics team was discovering that the voices had been stolen long before the shots were fired. They found evidence of failed wire transfers initiated from Pamela's accounts while she was already dead. They traced the origin of the suicide texts to a period when Helen's phone was being accessed within the house, simultaneous with Megan's own digital activity. The mansion on Keats Court wasn't a crime scene of a snap decision. It was the final destination of a calculated hunt. Megan had hoped that by the time the police arrived, the narrative would be set in stone. But in the elite silence of McLean, the dead were about to find a way to speak for themselves. The investigation into the deaths of Pamela and Helen Hargan did not begin with a search for a stranger in the night, but with a forensic autopsy of the digital and financial ghosts haunting the McLean mansion. While the physical scene, a mother and daughter dead from gunshot wounds, initially suggested a tragic murder-suicide, the detectives of the Fairfax County Police Department were professionally skeptical. In a town where information is the primary currency, they knew that the most revealing evidence often isn't found in blood spatter, but in the silent trail of data left behind by the living. As they began to pull at the threads of the murder-suicide narrative, the tapestry Megan Hargan had woven began to unravel with startling speed. The voices Megan had so carefully borrowed through staged text messages were the first to betray her. Detectives noticed a chilling pattern. The messages supposedly sent by Helen during her final moments were not just erratic, they were functionally impossible. While the texts spoke of a violent confrontation and a descent into suicidal ideation, the metadata revealed that the phone was being used within feet of Megan's own device at the exact moments the messages were sent. Even more damning was the realization that the suicide note, delivered via text, contained linguistic quirks and spelling errors that were habitual for Megan, but entirely alien to the college-educated, finance-focused Helen. The borrowed voices didn't sound like the victims. They sounded like a daughter trying too hard to play a part. Simultaneously, the financial investigation turned up a motive that was as old as time: raw, desperate greed. Forensic accountants discovered that in the days leading up to and even during the discovery of the bodies, Megan had been frantically attempting to wire massive sums of money, totaling over $400,000, from her mother's accounts to her own. These weren't just simple transfers, they were sophisticated attempts to intercept the funds Pamela had earmarked for Helen's new home. The investigators watched in real time as the digital logs showed Megan accessing her mother's bank portal while Pamela lay dead in the next room, her fingers still warm as her daughter tried to reset her own life with the stroke of a key. The physical evidence soon aligned with the digital betrayal. Ballistics experts determined that the .22 caliber rifle found near Helen was positioned in a way that defied the laws of physics for a self-inflicted wound. The trajectory of the bullet that killed Pamela didn't match a struggle. It matched a cold-blooded execution from a distance. As the detectives delved deeper into Megan's life, they found a woman living a double existence: a devoted daughter on the surface and a financial predator underneath who had been siphoning money from her mother for years. The investigation was no longer about a family tragedy. It was a manhunt for a mistress of borrowed voices who had calculated that the only way to secure her future was to silence her past. The legal reckoning for Megan Hargan began not with a dramatic confession, but with the cold, silent weight of evidence that she could no longer manipulate or borrow. While she had spent months weaving a narrative of a family destroyed by a younger sister's instability, the justice system in Fairfax County began to methodically dismantle her mask. The trial, which concluded with a final sentencing in January 2024, transformed the Gold Standard Mansion from a site of staged tragedy into a theater of truth, where the voices of Pamela and Helen were finally restored through forensic science and digital records. During the proceedings, the jury was presented with the chilling reality of Megan's double life. They heard how she had siphoned hundreds of thousands of dollars from her mother while playing the role of the helpful eldest daughter. The most harrowing moments came from the digital reconstruction of the crime, showing Megan casually texting from her dead sister's phone while sitting just feet away from the bodies. Despite her defense's attempts to lean into the murder-suicide theory, the physical impossibility of the rifle's position and the timing of the fraudulent wire transfers left no room for doubt. In the end, the woman who sought to reset her life with the blood of her family found herself facing a finality she couldn't forge. A double life sentence that ensured she would never again have a voice in the world she tried so desperately to own. The mansion on Keats Court stands today as a silent monument to a life meticulously stolen. In the affluent stillness of McLean, the gold standard of the Hargan family has been replaced by a chilling, cautionary tale of greed without a bottom. Megan sought to own a future by erasing the people who gave her a past, but in the end, her borrowed voices only served to amplify her own guilt. As the doors close on this tragedy, we are left with the echoing silence of a house where love was traded for a ledger, and where the only voice left is the cold, unwavering sound of justice. Like this story if you found it interesting, and subscribe to the channel. I look forward to reading your thoughts on this case in the comments below.